coffee, other news, and more. Coffee, other news, and more. August 4th, 2025. I received an email from a friend of mine that's in a city with driverless cabs, and she's not particularly interested in riding in them, and I can very much understand why after my experience in a Tesla Y model. Probably the same applies to my experience would have been the same in any electric vehicle. And from a technical standpoint, it was very interesting. For me, the car was very interesting in its technical abilities, if everything's going right. But the owner of the vehicle had asked me to accompany him on a ride to measure the level of radiation in the vehicle when it was driving. What I found, first of all, was that before he started out, I wanted to get a, shall we say, zero reading in the car. Well, he couldn't turn the vehicle off. He may have been able to, he just didn't know how. And you really have to wonder there why the vehicle has to be somewhat constantly on. But nonetheless, that's what it was. So we went for the ride. Well, when we started out, the level of radiation that my meter could read, which is from 200 megahertz to about 8 megahertz. Actually, the real range, it's not particularly accurate, is beyond that. But nonetheless, we went for the ride. And that particular range of the meter is where the typical cell phones, etc., wireless radiation is nowadays, not including the millimeter wave band. When we went for the drive that I found the readings were sometimes as low as 75,000 microwatts per square meter. Now, after a very extended period, or not a very extended period of time, I start to feel radiation problems at 500 microwatts per square meter. So you can imagine what I thought about 75,000 microwatts per square meter, which is still far below Safety Code 6 or the Canadian and many other countries' safety standards, but ridiculously high. Much of the driving, it went over 100,000 microwatts per square meter. Now, some of that could have been triggered by cars passing by and the LiDAR, or shall we say lane-changing radar, kicking in, although that was typically is a slightly higher radiation level or frequency than my meter measures. But anyways, it was running, we'll say, for an average of 100,000 microwatts per square meter. And the interesting thing was that this particular model has regenerative braking, which is good that it somewhat recharges the battery. But what astounded me was that the level went from around 100,000 microwatts per square meter to well over 200,000 microwatts per square meter as we were driving along. And that, to me, that's getting up into the serious, that the meter I use has reads not only numbers, but it also has flashing lights. Now, most people can definitely recognize flashing lights and the color of lights. It was well up into the red range. As a matter of fact, it was into the beyond the flashing red range and up into the pulsing red range. Now red is, according to this meter, is extreme. Each step above that is extreme plus, I guess you could say. And it was very disturbing to see this and realize that this is what people are subjecting themselves to in so many electric vehicles. That from the self-driving point of view, is I found very interesting that the vehicle still requires the driver to have their hands on the steering wheel at all times, but really does very little. And when you realize that things were being very much controlled by the electronics of the vehicle, it was unsettling. That I was glad there was a human safety operator, I guess you could refer to him as, in control of the vehicle, or still having the ability to be in control of the vehicle. But knowing how some people really, they may be in control, but they're not, their mind isn't in control. It's, you got to rest your hands somewhere, so they rest them in the steering wheel. And when you get into these, I think it's part of the main reason why my friend didn't want to ride in a self-driving cab, was that it's quite disconcerting to realize that as long as the electronics are working fine, it's safe, but if the electronics fail, if there's a glitch in the programming, then there can be problems. And I understand that in this particular city, there's a lot of complaints about the self-driving cabs with them, shall we say, rigorously stopping immediately on a amber light. Now, in a sense, motor vehicle acts tell us we should, but there's a little bit of discretion in stopping, which does cause problems when someone stops rigorously and hard on a amber light. And we can go down the line that, shall we say, technically precise driving doesn't allow for adaptation to the local driving conditions and circumstances and the way things are. And, well, frankly, I can very much understand why she didn't want to ride in the car. And while my experience in the EV for myself when I was measuring the radiation was very interesting, very glad I did it, I don't see a pressing need for me to ever get an EV, or for that matter, to have a ride in a self-driving cab.